When I arrived here, it was completely silent. No sound but the gentle splash of water against the boat. No rush, no traffic. Just mountains, the lake, and this little town holding its breath. I came here to paint, but I didn't expect what would happen next. 4 strangers had stopped. Each showed interest in what I was doing and offered to buy my unfinished sketch. And somewhere between the brushstrokes, I felt moved by the experience. This is Hallstatt, Austria. Let me show you exactly what I saw. As I stepped off the boat and into Hallstatt, it felt like walking into a painting. I'd seen the photos before, of course. It's one of those most photographed places in Europe, but it's only when you're standing there that you realise how impossibly still it all is. I walked through the streets slowly, taking as much of everything as I could in. The slate roofs, the wooden balconies, the towering mountains in every direction. I even found another artist painting on the streets. I looked over his shoulder and saw him with a collection of paintings from this very location. At this point, I wasn't rushing to find a spot to paint. I wanted to explore, to walk, to look and feel the place first. I like to let the town choose the painting in a way. There's always one view or one position that just pulls you in, and in your mind it clicks. You know, okay, this is where I want to paint, this is the scene that I want to go for, and that's where you stop. So after some time of walking around the streets and interacting with some of the local people there, taking interest in the shops and things that are being sold on the streets, I eventually decided to set myself up right here by the water's edge, but also along a very narrow and busy path. It was a pretty spectacular spot, very photo-worthy, and throughout my time in my chosen spot, many people took photos of themselves, their friends and families just ahead of my easel. During that time, many people would come close to me and look over my shoulder too and see what it was that I was painting, and they would make comments, and sometimes they would interact with me and ask me some questions. And something about being in this place, painting while many people walked past, kids pointing, couples stopping to watch, hearing many different languages being spoken at once, it impacted me a bit. You don't always get that connection when painting outdoors. Sometimes I'm standing completely alone and isolated in the middle of nowhere, somewhere out in nature. But here I did. You could say it was a distraction from my painting and being in the flow state, but much of it I think was a positive distraction. At times though, I was thinking to myself how much I would have liked to have had my headphones in and listened to some music that would keep my level of attention going without stopping, but I just happened to forget my headphones on that day. And also, as a result, I think more people saw that I wasn't wearing headphones and probably made it more likely that they were going to say something to me or comment on my painting. A woman stopped and she asked if the piece was for sale. Then another and another who made an offer on the spot. At the time, I wasn't ready to sell the painting as it wasn't in my eyes finished. But already people saw it as it was and liked it enough to make an offer. And even if I didn't sell it, just knowing that people connected to it, having people stand around me and speak about what it was that I was doing, and the sense of people being either impressed, amazed, or fascinated with the artist at the easel, or maybe even unimpressed if they saw it at the very early stages, all of that meant something. So I've just finished a painting sketch in this town called Hallstatt, which is over a lake in Austria. I got 2 buses, a train, plus a little boat, which was very nice, very scenic. But it was very hard to paint. There was hundreds of tourists going by every few minutes, speaking very loudly. Just want to show you some of these views. You can see them behind me. Absolutely gorgeous. And yeah, it was very hard to stay focused. But I got a sketch down that I can finish at home, which was good. And now I'm just going to quickly explore the town, get some pictures and videos. I had 3 people want to buy my painting, my artwork, and are interested in my website. So I've given them my business cards. And yeah, it's been quite an interesting and eventful day in a beautiful place. It's a World Heritage Site, UNESCO World Heritage Site. So I'm going to do a bit of exploring now before I leave. Just about to say, finally some peace and quiet in this little church on top of the hill. There's still people yapping away outside. Just walked up some stairs to get a nice view and get away from people, even though there's a small crowd behind me. Really beautiful here. And it just goes to show, if you're an artist and you can get your painting skills to a certain level, you can literally set up your easel anywhere in the world. Or you don't even have to set up an easel, you can just sit by or stand somewhere. Get your paints out, paint a scene, and you can have people want to buy it off you right there on the spot. That's the magic and the beauty of it, if you want to sell, of course. Sometimes it's nice to keep these paintings for yourself to look back on another time. But anyway, I'm going to enjoy the final few minutes of this place. Pretty amazing views. Could stay and paint here for days. So good. At times I found the crowds very distracting. The town seemed to come more alive and get busier, louder, slightly more intense as the minutes passed and as I developed my painting. I didn't want to close myself off from people and not speak to them, but at the same time, I just couldn't simply speak to everybody that was walking past. There were literally thousands of people there, or I wouldn't have been able to get anything done. There was probably 5 to 10 people walking past every 10 to 20 seconds. I had to do my best to focus on the task at hand, concentrate on the values, lighting, colour, what it was that I wanted to express and make the focus and show what was important, what was the painting actually about, and work out the different relationships of what it was that I was looking at. As I said, the values, the colour temperatures, the contrast and composition, all of that swirling around my mind at the same time whilst trying to converse with the general public and then apply that to my watercolour pad, which was in this case my canvas. I captured just about enough of the plein air piece in one sitting, in less than 2 hours I think, but I had to keep an eye on the time because there was a lot of travel to get back to my hotel in Salzburg where I was staying. And I still wanted to explore more of the town with enough time to catch one of the last boat rides back. But the painting experience there left me with something I couldn't shake off. An unforgettable experience, a memory, something far more than a photo could ever offer. Painting in this spot, which was again another place that I had previously envisioned myself painting in back in England. It helped to create an unforgettable memory in my mind, and so much of walking around those streets I remember so much more deeply than places that I have visited in the past and not done any art inside. After I had got enough of my plein air painting down in Hallstatt, I saw a number of people that I'd seen earlier walk past, and they checked out my painting again. They were very curious to see how the painting had developed. I recall there was a group of Ukrainian ladies who I'd interacted with earlier, and they wanted a closer look. And it was just nice to interact with these people and also get my painting to a point where I was satisfied enough to pack it away and then begin exploring more of the town again. And I did exactly that. I started to walk up the paths along the hill up towards the mountains, and I've got these beautiful views of the town from above. And towards the end of the day, I got on the boat back to the other side, and there was quite a while to wait for the train to come to take us back to Salzburg. I think it was 45 minutes to an hour, and one had been cancelled previously. So I decided to set up my easel again, looking at the town from a greater distance. But instead of painting the town this time, I decided to focus on trying to capture a very quick suggestion of the lake and the autumn tree. But just as I had started to lay in the first wash of colour, the rain started coming down, and I had to abruptly stop and pack everything away. That is just part of plein air painting and the journey and the experience, but you can always come back to a painting later after you've started it in a certain location. Just make sure you take that picture. Finally, when I got back to England again, I wanted to preserve that feeling that I said previously that I couldn't shake off. So I used the photos of the location I was standing in and laid down my plein air study as my reference and began building the final painting details on top in watercolour and gouache. For these studies, as usual, I'm working on my A5 300 GSM Aquarelle watercolour pad. I prefer that smooth surface when I want to really control the light transitions and get those soft reflections on the lake. Now, as I started working on this painting again back home in my studio, I just really wanted to try and capture some more of the details that I wasn't able to do on location when I was painting there in Hallstatt. One of the things that I hadn't included was these foreground leaves and foliage that came over, I think just to the left hand side of my easel and some a little bit in the distance. So I've mixed up some thick blends of, I think it was sap green, yellow ochre, and even a little bit of olive green in my watercolours, and then I've mixed them up with white gouache for the really thick opaque strokes that you see here, brushing in some of the grass with single strokes at the same time. This view of the town with the church seems to be one of the most iconic, most recognisable parts of the town. Just that building alone with the giant spire. So I wanted to make sure that I had framed that within my painting. And as I'm slowly getting into the painting once again, I'm just still building up details in the foreground, and I'm also wanting to make the church pop a bit, so I want to make sure I get the foliage and the trees, like a suggestion of them with my brush strokes around the church. But also I want to make sure that I paint in some of the more human elements into the architecture, such as a suggestion of the clock. I think it was on the front and the side in a disc, and also some of the windows on the front and the side of the building. They help to give an impression of scale when it comes to drawing buildings where people will enter. And again, I keep going back to my palette and mixing thicker and thicker mixes as I go along with this, and I'm starting to add in details to the church, a few highlights here and there. I also use titanium white gouache in a few key spots on the building and where light touched the water. It gives just enough pop without overpowering the watercolour. One tip when painting water reflections like this is not to overblend. Let the brush skip slightly across the surface to create those broken edges. One thing I have noticed is the background, which is very suggested, maybe even impressionistic with a few brush strokes. It had changed quite a bit from the moment that I'd started painting on location and as the day progressed. So I'm thinking in the back of my mind as I'm putting in some of these details on the buildings that I might have to return to changing that at some point later. And I'm not sure exactly what, but I do remember I think the impression I had when I first arrived was that there seemed to be this cool, maybe violet or indigo or light blue mist, or like a kind of atmospheric fog in a way. And in the back of my mind, I consider that I might bring that in a little bit later on. So I start working on some of the water reflections here. There's only a small part of this painting that shows the water as it leads in from this lower side, and picking up a lot of reflections from the trees and of course from the buildings too, especially as it was very close. It's a section that is very close to the surface of where, and the pavement of where people were walking around in the town. One thing that I was reflecting on as well whilst I was doing this painting over, returning to this painting was, what if I had actually agreed to sell my work in progress on location? I mean, I wouldn't have been able to, of course, bring it back home and work up these details and call it finished, but I would have, managed to get paid for doing a certain amount of work. I suppose that is going to be the choice that is left with you as an artist. What would you be comfortable selling a piece that is not finished and you're never going to know how it might have looked, but at the end of the day you're going to get paid for it? Or do you prefer to keep going with the painting and take the chance on that potential customer, that client, or the person who wants to buy your art might still want to buy it later? That is a risk that you will have to take and you have to think about when you paint on plein air outdoors. But I would say maybe just be prepared for that moment, because it can happen at any time. And it has happened to me more than once. So as I progress this painting, I keep returning to different areas. I'm moving around the painting, not just focusing on one bit. I'm trying to build the whole painting up as a whole as I go along. And you can see here I'm painting in, starting to put in the shadow areas of the roofs and make some suggested detail on these buildings. But at the same time, I need to keep thinking about values and lighting. And I did notice there were a lot of details on these roofs actually. The tiles you could see even from a distance. So I started putting some lines down that suggest some of this. There's also quite a lot of thinking. There's a lot of pausing and thinking, okay, where do I want to take this? Do I want to move it in a direction where the color temperature is more warm or cool, or am I actually making it an accurate representation of what I saw on location based on memory and also combined with the photo reference that I'm looking at as I'm working? Or do I want to make some artistic changes? I could even have put some suggestions of figures in, but I chose not to in this case. I use a very thin detail brush, which is my rigger brush for painting in the absolute fine details. This is a small painting as well at the end of the day, so you have to make sure that you hold still when doing these fine lines and just move around the painting, let it develop. There's no rush. I can take my time here. I'm back in the studio. I can just move around the painting at will and decide what I want to focus on and develop next. At this point, I'm thinking, okay, well, I've got enough down here. I could potentially call it a finished sketch at this point, but I'm not sure if my color balance is correct. I feel like maybe I could bring in some more cools to the painting, but I'm not exactly sure where at this point. So I do what I can to finish up some details, and then I decide it's time to begin removing the tape border off the painting, which is a very satisfying part. But you have to be careful because in this case, the tape had been on the painting, I think, for some weeks after I had been traveling around Europe, so it was quite difficult to get off. So you've got to be careful. You don't want to tear into the paper itself. That's easier said than done. And remove the tape slowly and carefully and in the right direction. Typically away from the painting is where you want to be pulling out or pushing. And once I have removed that tape, I now have this clean white border around the painting, which also helps me to see the painting in a new light with this contrasting frame around it. And it makes me think, okay, like what do I want to do next? How do I want to change this painting now? What is it that I could do to actually really bring this to life and finish as strong as I possibly can? Firstly, I decide I'm going to put a pencil border around the painting just to make sure it pops off even further from the white watercolour pad canvas. And this is also quite a satisfying part of the painting. I then name the town that I painted in. I usually date and sign, but instead of calling it completely finished at this stage, I take another look and I decide, actually, yeah, I'm going to go back in. There's something I want to do to that background. I feel like I need some atmosphere in there, some atmospheric perspective, some cooler light. So I clean my palette and I get ready to start mixing again. And I decide to go for this cool mix of ultramarine blue and titanium white, but quite a watered down, transparent layer. And I'm just building it up over what I've already got as the background and blending in some of those values and tones as I move along. You can probably also see as I'm progressing with this painting, I'm moving my brush, I'm tilting it, I'm flipping it. I'm trying to get that stroke in there and not go over that white border that I've got cleanly in place. So I'm having to be quite careful with my strokes. But already I'm noticing quite a bit of difference and I'm quite happy with how this is starting to look, and it's closer to the actual feel of the place when I arrived and also when I was painting there with the shifting light. It also helps, I think, for the main focal point to pop off from the page a little bit more. I then decide I add in some slightly warmer mixes to this wash in the background, but not too much. I then have another think. Okay, do I want to go maybe a value lighter this time? And I decide after a few minutes of cleaning my brushes and looking at the painting again, looking away, looking back, I decide, yeah, I'm going to go in with a lighter value, an even stronger lighter value on top as the previous layer had dried. I make a mark to test the opacity, the opaqueness in the top left corner. Decide it's pretty good, but a bit too warm. So then I go back to my ultramarine and titanium white mixture and I bring some of that back down and really bring in that cool of the sky. And I also decide to bring it into some of the foreground lake area of the painting. I think this decision helped to harmonize the painting a bit more. It was leaning a bit more on the warm side, which wasn't really intentional, it just sort of happened in that way. I could have also have maybe dropped some more of these cooler colours and lights, maybe on top of the roofs and maybe even some of the tree branches, but it was a very small painting, so I did just want to get this finished without fussing too much about details. But in the end, I did decide, actually, you know what, I am going to bring in a few more tones, a few more lines, a few more suggestions of detail on these roofs and see what I can come up with here. Just a few final marks. If this painting spoke to you, it's now available on my website. You'll find the link down below in the video description. And if you're an artist yourself, whether you're trying to build confidence, create more consistency, or even start selling your work, I offer coaching to help with mindset, skill building, and growing your art business. I work with both beginners and those already making sales. Here's a link below if you'd like to learn more or book a free call. I'd love to support you on your journey.